Good afternoon. It's so nice to see all of you. Ladies, it has been a year that we have been doing this. It's really pretty amazing. On one hand, it's crazy. On the other hand, it really is amazing. And I just want to, just say that I really so much appreciate your joining me and being part of our conversation because it really is incredible. So I'm looking to see, for some reason, I'm not seeing this. I'm trying to see where I can mute everybody, but I'm not seeing it. So if you wouldn't mind muting yourselves, and then when you have something to contribute, please unmute. Okay. Okay. All right, Lisa, we'll take your call. We'll listen for you. Okay. All right. So this week we are concluding the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus. We will conclude with a double portion called Vayakel is one and Pekude is the other. And this concludes also all of the weeks about the building of the Mishkan, which we're going to talk about, but not so much from the building of the Mishkan perspective, but of the hearts and minds of the people who contributed, because there's such just beautiful, inspiring words and lessons. When we finish a book of the Torah, if we were in the synagogue and we were finishing, we would say chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek, which means strength, strength, and let us be strengthened. That we always want to take our Torah learning and have it fuel the next round of Torah learning. That whatever we accomplish, we don't want to kind of peter out. We want to be able to mobilize whatever inspiration we have gotten and use it to launch us to the next level. So that's why we really put more of an emphasis on how we conclude something than how we start it. So when we start a book of Torah, we don't say chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek, which is interesting because usually people have like a kickoff event, which I'm all big on kickoff events. I love kickoff events. It's almost more important to have the ending event, the event of what do you do at the end when it's over, and how do you kind of mobilize the energy, the inspiration, the effort to get it to go to the next endeavor. So interestingly, it's one of the reasons, and I learned this and I had no idea of this, that one of the reasons we have a seuda, a festive meal, when people finish learning, like if we were all together, we could have a festive meal to celebrate the end of the book of Exodus. That when we do that, that says, why do we do that? It says that the act of eating is descriptive of what it is we want to do. It says, like, what does eating mean? It means I take something from the outside and I ingest it and I put it in and it becomes part of me. In other words, I am what I eat. I am what I learn and incorporate into my life. So the Seuda becomes an actualization, a metaphor for what it is we are doing, which is why we always have a Seuda when we are celebrating some spiritual accomplishment, which is really kind of interesting. And of course, the Jewish people would be around food, but we use it as a way to connect. So even the Seuda, the meal that we had for Purim, the reason we have it is because it's to celebrate all the mitzvot, all of the commandments that we fulfilled for Purim, of giving shalach manos, of the gifts to the poor, of hearing the Megillah, giving tzedakah, all of that. We're celebrating all of that and taking it in with a meal to symbolize that we want to take it in. So we use that metaphor that we want to take something in. We use it when we say eating. Like if you see like a really cute, sweet little baby, you say, I just want to eat you up. Like now, obviously, hopefully that's not what we really have in mind of eating them up. But what that means is I love you so much. I want you to go into me and become part of me. That's how much I love you. You are that to me. So when we say I just eat it up, that's what it means. And so we actually do the eating, but it's supposed to be symbolic of that. So we are finishing this book of Torah of Exodus, and we are finishing the story, the telling about the building of the Mishkan. We have seen starting from last week, really throughout, but last week when we had the parsha of Ki Tisa, where it was the sin of the golden calf, the people who were not involved in that sin were the tribe of Levi and the Jewish women. Okay, so the Jewish women are given a reward of the celebration of Rosh Chodesh, which is the new month to celebrate because the women kept the faith in a time of darkness, and Rosh Chodesh, which celebrates the new moon, is also at a time of darkness. So it wasn't like, gee, let's see, Rosh Chodesh. It wasn't like picked out of random. It was picked because that is the exact same idea of maintaining trust in dark times. I feel like we've had one Rosh Chodesh day after the next for the past year of how do you hang in there from day to day to day to day and just keep on going. But the Jewish women have always been the people who did that. So it's just so inspiring. So they did not participate in the golden calf. But what's even more beautiful is the way they did give. They did not give their gold for the golden calf, but they gave everything for the building of the Mishkan, for the building of the portable sanctuary. So one of my favorite phrases in all of the Torah is in this week's parsha. So I just want to talk about it, and then we're going to talk about what it means to be heartfelt in what we do. So on page 519, which is chapter 35, verse 22, the sentence opens up and it says, the men came with the women. The men came with the women, which on the surface sounds like, okay, the men and the women came together to give their donations, their contributions, their efforts, but the Hebrew is very instructive. So the Hebrew says, vayavo'u, and they came, ha'anashim, which are the men, al hanashim, on the women. They came on the women. So I always kind of pictured a little piggyback thing. You know, the women are kind of like, okay, guys, let's go. And the men are literally on the women as the women are going forward and going to Moshe to bring their contributions. But of course, it wasn't that they were riding piggyback, but when it says like riding on someone else's coattails, is the men rode on the inspiration and the enthusiasm of the women, and they followed suit. So it says the Jewish women were the primary people who were inspired to give for the Mishkan, and their inspiration inspired the others as well, but that they were the ones who were at the base of it. So the question is like, where does inspiration to give come from? So I'm just thinking about it and just like wanted to ask you all too, just to even contribute to say of who inspired you to be a giver? Like when you were a child, was there somebody, was there something in place that kind of put that in your life vocabulary of something to do? Because the Jewish people are givers, but where does it come from? Just even from our own more immediate experience, like where does that come from? Does anybody have an example from their own life of who they learned from? Daisy.
Am I unmuted? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. No, my father, even when he didn't have much, he always had enough and more to give.
Beautiful.
And I saw it growing up. He always was considering somebody who had less than we did. And when he died and we were sitting Shiva, and we were getting letters from all these organizations and people that I had no clue that every time he had a new grandchild born, he would give something to the Hadassah pediatrics department, for somebody, for an unwed mother. And he was a religious man. So I was very surprised that, what do you mean unwed mothers? That wasn't his thing. But I was just sitting there and these things came, and we both, with the whole family, we were so awed that we didn't even know. Yeah.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. Beautiful. Dorothy.
Well, my situation is very similar in that it was my father who believed if you lived in a community and you took from a community, you gave back to the community, whether it was the Jewish community or the community at large. And that was instilled in my sister, my brother, and I from a very, very early age. And I called myself a professional volunteer because I spent my adult life volunteering for whether it was our little temple in Muncie, Indiana, or it was public television. I was giving back.
Beautiful. So those lessons, and your parents don't have to tell you, you should give money. You learn what you see. You learn what you see. Anybody else have something to share about that? Etta, you can unmute.
Unfortunately, it didn't come from my parents, and I had no grandparents. But for me, it came from a Chabad Rebbitzin that I met in my late 20s before I was observant. And she was a giver par excellence. She had an endless flow of energy, enthusiasm, 10 children, invited us for lunch and grabbed us out of the soup of San Diego. And I just wanted to be like her, even a little bit. She was like my superwoman. So she really was the giver that made me want to give.
That's so beautiful. If you notice, the givers are very happy. Even like a little kid, if they, I think this is in our book, Living in the Present Moment, on the section of tzedakah. It's hard to remember what things got edited in and what got out. But even a little child who is raised in a home or just has the beginning notions of tzedakah would never point to their, I should say this way, if they have a tzedakah box and they were to show somebody their tzedakah box, their comment would be, look how much money I fill in the blank in my tzedakah box. What's the verb that they use? Have. Look how much money I have in my tzedakah box. They don't say, look how much money I lost to tzedakah. That is not a thing, that people have what they give and it makes them happy. You've never been to a fundraising event where the big givers are sobbing on their table because they just have like so much pain over how much money they've given. It makes people happy because where your money is your heart, of where your heart goes. And like Etta, what you saw is you saw somebody who was not just giving, but who was happily giving. And same thing with Dorothy and for Daisy, that what you saw was your father's giving in a way that they felt there was a sense of honor to it, a privilege, even if they were themselves didn't have, of to be able to give. And that's been a Jewish thing. Even in the poor shtetl, the people would have little pushkas, little charity boxes on their window ledges, putting in like a kopek or whatever it might be, that people to be able to be a giver and to participate in that. I think one of the unfortunate things in our society is that we have two classes of people, benefactors and beneficiaries. And the Jewish way is not that way. Everybody is supposed to be a benefactor. Some people have more or less to give, but everyone's a benefactor. Leslie.
Unmute myself. So one of the many lessons that my mother taught me was that when you're young and you join the shul and you can't pay for whatever it is, the shul takes care of you. And when you're older and you have it, you make up for it. It ends up being many times over that you make up for it, but you should not be afraid to be able to enjoy that. So the story behind that is that my mother sent me to the kindergarten at the synagogue, and then somebody there found out that I had a brother who was a year younger, and she said, well, why didn't you send him too? She said, this is all the money I have. They said, send him too. When you have it, then you make up for it. And that is one of the things that we learn as we grow, and we take with us when we become active in synagogue life, when we become members of boards who decide what do you do when people don't have dues money, and you say, bring them on, you know, when they have it, they will give it.
That's right. And I think what you're saying, Leslie, is also really interesting, because in addition to giving back to the community, there's also the idea of in time, that you're participating in a system and in a relationship. And so sometimes you're the recipient and sometimes you're the giver, but it's not, it's an ongoing involvement and engagement. And then we have another idea, which is called hakarat hatov, which is recognizing the good. So that organizations or institutions that have done good for you, even if you're no longer there, you know, it's like, you know, the school our kids went to. So Denver Jewish Day School, our kids went there. It's been kind of a long time since they've been there, a really long time. And one of our kids didn't finish there. He chose to go off in a different direction. And you know, people always say like, well, but they failed me in this, and I didn't really like that. It was like, did you receive benefit? And that's the question. And so we're going to the DJDS. Actually, the speaker is Jason Auerbach from my daughter's class. I mean, now he's there as this major adult, which is so funny because to me, he's still a high school graduate in my little mind. So it's the hakarat hatov of the recognizing, because that's what hakarat hatov does not mean gratitude. It means recognizing the good. And recognizing the good can mean that the whole thing wasn't good. It could be that, you know, you stomped off because they went off in a direction that you hate, but did you receive good? It's one of the reasons why we say that for the Jewish people, the Torah says that we're not allowed to hate the Egyptians. It's like, are you kidding me? They oppressed us for 210 years. What's not to hate? It's like, yes, but they also fed you during a famine and they welcomed you and let you in, and things were good initially, even though things went bad later. So you can't hate them. You have to have hakaras hatov. You have to recognize the good. So this kind of expansiveness of spirit is really what it's talking about. It's like seeing myself in the context of a community, not as just transactional, you know, well, you didn't give me what I really wanted this year. You know, the sermons weren't so good. So I'm cutting my donation. It's like I'm participating in a relationship through time as well. And it opens a person up. It just makes them into a different kind of a person. Dorothy.
Well, I was just going to say, I grew up in a very small Midwestern town with a very small temple. We had, it was the only game in town, so we had everybody, whether it was Orthodox, Reform, whatever, we all got along. But in this small community, there was, I don't know exactly how to say this, but people knew that at Bethel Temple you were taken care of, and sometimes we got taken advantage of.
Always happens. That always happens. And you know what? It's just like a store has a certain amount that they always have to write off for people who shoplift or do whatever. It's part of the cost of doing business. And we're supposed to consider that almost like it's like a shalom fund. In fact, somebody even said this, every person should have a shalom fund. And this is for the money. It says, you know, we save money, you know, we're going to spend a whole lot of money buying matzah, you know, and matzah Passover products. And it's kind of like, as they say, the less real food is in it, the more it's going to cost. So like, we're going to spend a lot of money on that. We spend money on lulav and etrog. We spend money on kosher food. We spend money on all of these things because that's what it takes to be part of it. So, well, there's also a relationship costs, which are the costs for the friction, the costs for when somebody didn't do it right. So even, you know, like, you know, especially in the olden days when we would go out for lunch or whatever, and the bill comes, and there's always somebody in the group who has their calculator and says, you owe me $9.48, you know, instead of like, oh, please, you know, do you have to like nickel and dime this? So there are always going to be people, this is not new. There are always going to be people who take advantage, and there are always going to be people who cheat, and there are always going to be all those people. And it's like you have a shalom fund, because the downside of becoming a person who is called sarut ayin, narrow-eyed, a person who is like suspicious of people and, like, oh, they're probably trying to take advantage of me. This doesn't mean that we're not supposed to be careful, but it means like that we're not, it creates a, when your mother said your face is going to freeze like that, it really does. So it's like a person is going like this all the time. That's what you end up looking like. And so if you don't want to be that person, don't be that person. You need to have kind of an approach to say, you know what, it's right. I'm sure there's somebody who is going to take advantage. And again, we're supposed to be careful. So like, for example, in our community here in Denver, there is a policy that somebody who comes and wants to go door to door soliciting money, for themselves or for their organization Jewishly, they need to have a certificate. There's a rabbi in town who issues a certificate, meaning that he checked them out to make sure that they were a legit thing. Now, is it possible that this person really isn't legit and there's some other thing? It is. But at some point, it's more important that we be the giver than that they be 100% deserving recipient. But it is hard because nobody wants to be taken advantage of in all of this.
Well, I was going to say, even though it happened time and time again, it never stopped.
Good. Oh,
The community continued to give and take care.
see, that's beautiful.
Caretakers.
And you know what I would offer on that is that Hashem blessed you. That when God sees that we are generous, spirited like that, and don't close shop because of that, I think more money comes to us to be able to help other people, because it's a bracha. It's a blessing to be a giver. And so people who are devoted to giving in spite of these glitches along the way are rewarded for that. Now, I'm sure, there's always the con artist who comes in, Bernie Madoff style and wrecks people. That's a different thing. That is a different thing. But I'm just talking about your average scammers, your average con artists who are, whatever. The people who are applying for a scholarship for their kids for day school, but they just bought a new car. And it's like, excuse me, but you know what? Maybe they needed a new car because they have their kids that have to take to day school. So it's also hard to judge all these things. But Dorothy, I think that's really beautiful. I'm sure you had a beautiful community that brought people together, and you were blessed from the big hearts that people had in taking care of one another, because ultimately we're supposed to be taking care of God's children, especially starting in our family. Yes, the whole world, but especially our Jewish brothers and sisters, because that's immediate family. And so when we take care of,
to grow up.
What was that?
It was a nice way to grow up.
And those lessons stay with us, and it turns into a way of being in the world that has such big ramifications, because it makes us elevated people, and it filters into other aspects of how we live our lives. So the words that are used in the parsha, there's just a number of. One of them is called a chachmat lev, which literally means wise-hearted, and that God gave extra ability to the people who were wise-hearted. So it's like, what does it mean to be wise-hearted? It's mean that when people want to do the right thing, that God helps us. God helps us do the right thing, and even God helps us develop skills that either were in very kind of primitive form or not manifest at all. You look at people who have started organizations or who have just been in the forefront of doing amazing things. They wouldn't have said about themselves that they had this great ability, that they were public speakers, that they were fundraisers, that they were organizers. It's like, where did that come from? It says, from this parsha, we learn it came from the desire to do it. If you desired to do it, then God would bless you with that ability, because the Jewish people were given the ability to do things that they had no training in. They were not artisans. They were not weavers. They were not gold workers. They were not silver, whatever. They weren't even builders. I mean, people joke about the Jewish men aren't really builders. You hire. We're good at calling someone and hiring them to come and build for us. It says, but the Jewish people built the Mishkan. They made all of these materials, and where did they get the skill? Because they wanted it. They were chachmat lev. So that's one of the phrases, being wise-hearted, of wanting the right thing. And when we want to participate in the right things, the right causes, the right organizations, the right activities, that God will help us. That's considered to be wise-hearted. The other word that is used is called I think it's pronounced a nadav lev, from the word nadiva, which means to volunteer, a voluntary heart, a heart that likes to participate and step forward, and that heart is also blessed. So the person who steps forward and comes first instead of last, and is a role model and is an inspiration. And then there's also the word about having an elevated heart, which really is more related to rising to the occasion. You rise to the occasion, you're needed in a community or in your family or in an organization or whatever, and you rise to the occasion and you take on a role that you wouldn't necessarily have even thought of for yourself. So does anybody else have maybe an example of that, of kind of literally when people say stepping up, rising to the occasion, taking on a role or responsibility for a worthwhile cause, organization, effort to make something happen? Somebody have anything like that for themselves? Leslie, just want to unmute.
Yeah. My dad, when my brother wanted to be a scout, there was nobody to lead a troop. And my father had no experience in this endeavor. Just like his father didn't teach him how to work with wood, but he taught himself how to do that. That's kind of a side story. But my dad became a scoutmaster and my mother became a den mother, which was really funny because we needed that in our community. We needed that in the school that we went to, which is where the scouting kind of was organized. And it was an important piece of the community activities for the kids then. And he stepped up.
And it's amazing. And sometimes, like in a small school, a small community, small organization, in a way you develop bigger leaders because you can't hide, because people need you. And it's like, we need you to do this. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. It's like, okay, don't let that stop you. Just move forward. So here were the Jewish people building this Mishkan, and they stepped forward, and it keeps repeatedly throughout the parsha saying that they were inspired givers, they were wise-hearted, they were volunteering, and that they gave with their heart and not just, going through the motions. So the other thing has to do with when we put our heart into something, it changes what the thing is. It's not just that it feels good, it actually changes the thing. It's like doing a heart transplant. It's like, I gave my heart to, and people say that, what do they mean? They say, I gave my heart and soul to whatever it was. And this could be to your family, to your community, to an organization. That could really be to anything. But anything we give our heart and soul to is impacted by the very gift of our heart and soul. And so specifically the Mishkan, of giving that is like that it changed the nature of what it wasn't just like a tent, think about things that you have. Maybe you have something you inherited from somebody dear in your family, and the thing itself is not that special. I mean, on the market, it would get nothing, but the person used it and it's like their heart and soul are in it. And so the value of it to you is enhanced, like it's priceless, really priceless. So does anybody have anything like that they inherited from somebody that has that status, where somebody else saying like, give that away or throw it away, it's nothing, but it's but to you, because somebody used it for whatever, however, it changes the nature of it. Etta.
I have a large aluminum scoop for bread flour. It's huge. And it's my husband's grandfather. When he came to America from Europe, he worked in a bread factory. And that was something he carried with him. And then later on, they made a large company out of it. But that's what was left from his grandfather, was this scoop. And to me, it symbolizes taking risks and success from Hashem, and just starting in a new country, starting in Buffalo, New York, because he had exactly the amount of money for a ticket from New York to Buffalo, no further.
And that's
So-
as far as he got.
That's
That's so beautiful. So that's so beautiful. So the things that we use, that we invest our money in, our time, our heart, our energy, all of those things, the thing is changed by it. I think there was some, I don't know that the study, because I don't really know anything about it, but something about a violins that have been played by master violinists change. The instrument itself changes from having been played by that person, which is just wild. So think about the things we do. That means if an aluminum flowers, bread flour scooper can be transformed because of who used it and under what conditions and everything else, the truth is it's the same about everything in our homes. It's not just the thing that you inherited from your grandmother because you are somebody else's person of, in the line of folks, that you are that person. And even if we don't give something to somebody, the way we use things changes what they are. So the way we use our time, the way we use our money, the way we use our talent, our skills, our resources, our stuff is really all going to be metaphysically and actually changed by what we bring to it as we use it, which is really strange. I'll tell you a very kind of almost the opposite. It was very weird. So for those of you who knew my in-laws, they lived in the same house their whole time they were in Denver. They never upgraded, upscaled. They never did any of that. A very simple home, but it was an amazing home for those who were ever there. And it was a beautiful home. Daisy, Leslie, some people I know who were there. And so my mother-in-law was an amazing cook and baker, really, really good. So it was very interesting. So her kitchen always seemed very magical to me. When we went to clean it out after when we were going to sell the house, and it looked like in her drawers, it's like worn out forks, worn out knives, kind of bent spoons. It was so not special. I was like, wow, she animated everything she had with her presence and made such amazing things from it. So we inherited her sterling silver, which of course is valuable in and of itself. But what makes it really valuable is they used it every Shabbos and every Yontif. So I saw for 30 or more years, I saw that silverware being used for their holidays and for their Shabbos meals. And that is the most precious thing. I really feel like that was their Mishkan, because they made their home into a Mishkan. And it's like, that's what determines it. It was like, she could have traded in that silverware at any time for some other whatever, but that wasn't the value. The value was like what she did with it and how she used it and the hospitality that went with it. So, right, Daisy, that's
amazing. They were just an amazing couple, an amazing home. And they never sort of competed with all the other doctors, everybody had a bigger house and better this and better that. They didn't live there. That's not what was important. I loved it.
Yeah. And it was really amazing. So it says that's what it means to make a Mishkan, because sometimes when you see a drawing of the Mishkan or a painting of what it looked like, I have to say, it looks a little minimal. It looks like that's the Mishkan. We spent 5 parshas talking about that, and that's what it looks like. It's like, yep, that's what it looks like, because the heart and soul of these millions of people that went into it is what transformed it into an otherworldly but down to earth place. And that's the same thing with us. So, we go through our lives now. We're going to be getting ready for Pesach and getting ready for going through all our things and cleaning. And so just to have in mind as we go through and start looking at our house, I always tend to look at my house differently around this time of year. First of all, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's that dirty. I can't believe I've let that go since last year. That is crazy. So part of it is looking at it differently in that way. But part of it is asking ourselves the question, how am I using what I have? How am I using? Am I putting, even in the most mundane thing, when I make challah and I'm using my cup measurer, when the grandfather was using that measurer when he first, the scooper, was he necessarily thinking about it in some holy way? It was just his tool. But when we can bring our hearts to what we are doing, and it can be the most mundane of tasks, it doesn't have to be, I saved the world. It could be, I fed my family. I made myself a healthy, nice meal. It's ordinary stuff. My clothing, does my clothing reflect a spirituality and a divine connection? Does my food, does my home, do my books, the things that are in my surroundings, is this a holy place? Is this a mishkan? Is this a place where God's presence can dwell? Where there is really a spirituality that pervades the place? And that's the question that we're really asking ourselves, because ultimately that's what the Mishkan is. The Jewish woman is the embodiment of the Mishkan. It says the Mishkan was based on Sarah's tent. Sarah's tent is the Mishkan. It says it was built on that, and the temple also. It's called a Beit HaMikdash, a house of holiness. It says that it was modeled after Sarah, because her tent, her home, which was modest, and yet it held all of the essential spiritual elements. So Passover is always a home holiday. I mean, even if people go out of town, they go out of town and get a casita or whatever and make their Seder in their casita, and it's still a little house thing, their home thing. And it's really meant to be a reflection of the Jewish woman. So even if you have the privilege of being a guest at somebody's Seder this year, if you've been vaccinated or whatever you're doing, it's still looking at it as like, this is the season of the Jewish woman. In the merit of the righteous Jewish women, the Jewish people were redeemed from Israel. In the merit of the Jewish women, the righteous Jewish women, the Mishkan was built, and the Jewish people have been able to keep their eyes focused forward in the right way. Thoughts or questions or just things that come to mind about our stuff, our holy stuff that we have, and how to use it and infuse it. Kathy, did you want to say something? I see you're unmuted. No? Okay. All right. Anybody else? Something? Okay. I'm happy that for my Passover, I have my great-grandmother's dishes that are, interestingly, they make plates bigger now than they used to. When people had less food, kind of like closets. You look at closets in homes that were like from the 30s, 40s, and early 50s. How big were the closets when you were growing up? Now closets are the size of a bedroom. And then they were like the size of I could barely fit anything into it. So dishes were also smaller. Maybe if you paid more, you got more. But the dinner plate is the size of a salad plate. And the salad plate is the size of a butter plate. And the butter plate is the size of I don't know what, like a little, it almost feels to me like a tea set, a doll's tea set. So it's kind of funny when I plan the meals, because I plan like whatever I'm going to have, whether it's just the two of us or not. And it's like, there's not room on the plate. There's not room on the plate because people didn't used to eat so much. And so like, we're just used to so much more. And so I also use, and the plates are cracked, and the glaze is cracked. And so don't use red horseradish on a plate that has cracked glaze. I'll just put that out there. And yet I keep it, and I wouldn't trade them for anything. And when we set the table, it looks beautiful. Even though if somebody else gave me like, here, have these dishes, they're all cracked and broken and whatever, I'd be like, no, like I wouldn't pay 2 cents for these. If these were being given away, I wouldn't pay 2 cents for them. And yet I wouldn't trade them for anything. So I use them as an opportunity to connect to my personal history, as well as to the values that I was privileged to grow up with. And that is as much a part of Seder and Pesach and really all the Jewish holidays as the actual holiday itself, is putting ourselves in that flow of time of the Jewish people. Lisa. So you're on mute.
Forgive me.
That's okay.
a year later and I'm still not zooming properly. It's
That's
embarrassing.
okay. That's okay.
I'm curious if you always felt that way about having your family's things, because I kind of did, but I have a greater appreciation now that my mom's getting older, but my boys have no interest in any of our stuff, any of their own stuff from growing up. And I'm holding on to this thinking, well, I'll either throw it out now or I throw it out in 30 years. Just not going to want it. Like,
Yes.
I'm curious if you always cared about it.
So I'm not really actually a very sentimental person, honestly. I'm really not so sentimental. I have, when we think about moving to Israel, I said to my husband, I will have a harder time getting rid of notebook paper than some of the things that belong to people who are special to me. It's because it's useful. So I'm a usefulness person. Now more sentimental with parents who have passed away. It's a little bit different. I think people change, but people have a different approach to living their lives. The younger people I see with our kids, like what they wanted from their grandparents was something small and useful. So like a kiddush cup. Our son wanted my father's cufflinks because he wears, French cuffs. And so he wanted that for Shabbos, or a bowl or something, but not like all of this stuff, just like one thing. They also don't have room in a small apartment in New York, a small apartment in Israel, or our kids who are so, are going to move 15 times in 15 places. They're not going to schlep stuff around. They don't want all that stuff. It's a burden to them, but they might want a book that was beloved or a picture framed. And then it becomes almost like a concentrated perfume. It's like the distilled essence of the person or the relationship. That's what they want. They don't want all the stuff. And it says, if you have anything brown, forget it. They don't want anything brown. So meaning brown furniture. Don't you want this rocking chair? I rocked you on it when you're like, no, so it's like all these things, they don't want it, but mostly they don't have room for it. And it's not their lifestyle.
And the things that the way, or the things, those things that were in the family that we used to entertain, our kids don't entertain like that anymore.
Yeah, I think about like the sterling silver is like,
Silver.
who wants to polish silver? Nobody. In fact, I saw somebody who took their sterling silver and had it dipped in something that would make it like stainless. So something that they would not ever have to, like, oh my gosh, it's like taking like gold and covering it with yellow paint. It was like that kind of thing. But it's challenging, and yet things still do mean something. It's just a matter of finding what the right thing is, because our things are symbolic. But you look at, what people used to pass on. They would pass on a kiddush cup, candlesticks, a challah cover, maybe if it wasn't too stained, a menorah, a Seder plate. They didn't have all this stuff. Just because people didn't have so much stuff, we just have a lot of stuff. So in a way, it's very helpful to kind of edit it down and get the essence of this. So I kept the strangest thing from my grandmother. I wanted her glass salad bowl. It's just a non-distinct glass salad bowl shaped like this. We use it almost every Shabbos. And it's for the stupidest of reasons. It's because when we were growing up and we would go to her house for a meal, she would make a salad. And I hated everything that was in that salad. And you could see it through the glass. It was like it was there on the table, and there's like avocados and cucumbers and like all this gross stuff, which now is my favorite things in the world. So I love to have this every time. It's been a long time. Every time I use it, it makes me think of my childhood and how I've grown up, and like all the things that I thought were unacceptable that I didn't like that are now my favorite things. So what something means to somebody is also in the eyes of the beholder of like, why does this mean something to you? The cufflinks that my son kept from my father have fish on them. Well, my father used to take my son fishing, in the summer every single week. So cufflinks with a fish on them, that's his relationship with my father. So that's part of it too. But things mean things to people, even if they're at a different age and stage. So when we talk about just like this building of this Mishkan, which was this place filled with all this stuff that on one hand was made out of valuable materials, but some of it wasn't. Some of it was goat hair. like a goat hair blanket. Like, how valuable is that? Not so valuable. But the love and the attention and the appreciation and the commitment and the spiritual connection that went into it is what made it what it was. And the truth is, that's what makes what we have special also. We think, and we know that at some level, we think that what we want is something fancier, newer, or better. But what we really want is something that is more meaningful and that we feel more connected to. And so sometimes we're looking for what we want, but in the wrong category. And if I could just get this, then that will make me happy. That will feel good. It's like, no, actually what will make you feel good was how you use it, how you use it, what you use it for, and the heart and soul that you put into using it. That's what will give it its ultimate value. So I always thought it was interesting that, like on the opposite of like eBay, you can sell something if it's in mint condition. It's like, well, in a way, it's like, that's interesting, but like, what good is that? It makes much more sense to want something that was loved and used by, hundreds of people before you, and now you're adding your name to the list. That's what real value is, and that's how we see it, and that we're connecting ourselves to these ancient symbols, these ancient artifacts, these ancient everything's, because we're connecting to the heart and soul that goes into making them, and that gives us a sense of also place in the world. It's like, I belong to a thing in the world. And I think that takes us back to the idea of our money and how we use it. And giving tzedakah that's how we establish who we are. We don't, if you really want to know about somebody, we don't look and see how much money they have. That doesn't really tell us anything. That tells us maybe they were smart in business, or they got lucky, or they inherited, or they weren't so. It doesn't tell us anything. What tells us something is, how did they use their money that they did have? And if they had 10 cents to their name, how did they use those 10 cents? And that's really the mark and the measure of who we are. Daisy, looked like you maybe had another thought to share.
I just had this, when you were talking, I remembered when my parents died and my brother and I were cleaning out the apartment, there was a picture of Theodore Herzl that my mother embroidered, and that's in the living room. And my brother and I, we kind of, whatever you want, you take, whatever. There was no conflict about anything. And then when it came to that picture, we both looked at each other, knowing that we both wanted it. And so there was this silence, and he said, you know what? You could have it for 6 months in Denver, and I could have it for 6 months in Amsterdam. And I just broke out laughing, because that was kind of, in a way, not very practical or whatever. But it was because we both, were Zionists, and my mother embroidered it, and it was in their apartment in Jerusalem, since they lived there. But that moment of, that's what we both wanted. That was
absolutely
the thing that we kind of, everything else was, whatever you want, take it, doesn't matter, whatever. But that was so funny. Yeah.
That is so fun. So we had that actually with a bracelet of my mother-in-law's that everybody wanted for their daughter, like for the granddaughter on their side. And what we decided to do was exactly to share it. And so it started with the oldest granddaughter. She kept it, who happened to be our daughter. She kept it for a year. And on my mother-in-law's birthday, she mailed it to her cousin next in line, who got it for a year and mailed it next in line, and rotating the bracelet so that everybody has it. And just even know, but see, this is what is so amazing. It becomes more valuable because now it's the bracelet that binds all the cousins for where they live around the world.
Right.
It's like, so now it went from just hers to everybody's. And so everyone has a share in it. And so, like, oh, Audrey wore this, Rachel wore this, and now I'm wearing it. And that being part of something elevates it. And so I guess that's the other piece, is that all of these people who participated in the building of the Mishkan, it wasn't just what they got out of it from their participating. It was what they got out of it from being part of something bigger, that they join together to create something. And at the end, Moshe blesses them. He blesses his work, that they should be blessed. And you could say, like, why should I bless them? They did what they were supposed to do. It's like, no, but they all work together. And it's one of the, maybe this is why the Torah spends so long talking about this. There was no fighting. There was no fighting. There was no competition, no competitiveness, no one-upsmanship, no anything that would have detracted from what this Mishkan was meant to represent. And it said the people who had gold gave gold. The people who had turquoise gave turquoise. Everybody gave what they had to give and had the pleasure of contributing to something on the whole that was amazing. And that's also a good lesson, is that when everybody has a goal that they share, that's really the only way people can get along. Otherwise, all of the differences just are going to eat people. They're just going to eat people apart. They're just going to, because everybody has a different way of doing things. So it's going to make it difficult. So you see this in, in families after a parent dies and the kids start fighting over the inheritance and how things are divided up. And if those parents could come down from the other world and tell them, like, they would say, I only want you to get along. Like, I'll take it away from both of you. Nobody can have it if you're going to fight. I think I may have shared this on another occasion, that when our last family dinner before my mother-in-law passed away, she made it very clear to all of us who were gathered that what she really only cared about was all of us getting along. And in a way, it's like we were all like little kids. Here we are, like grandparents in our own rights. And she's like, what's most important to Dad and me is that you get along. And that was and then she died just a few months later. That was in May and she died in August. And I think that helped us as we were going through things. I mean, I think people would have done pretty well dividing things up anyway, but that was really because she said it to all of us at the same time. It was definitely ringing in our ears. It's like, Mom and Dad would not be happy even if for one moment we started snipping at each other. So when you have a unified purpose, then all of the different variations of people's whatever can find a way to find shalom and can find harmony and peace. And that ultimately is what the Mishkan and the Beit HaMikdash represented. So we know that when the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, it's like we're living off of the destruction of the second temple. And that destruction was caused by sinat chinam, by baseless hatred, lashon hara, speaking negatively about one another. And that's what destroyed the temple. It only looked like the Romans did it, but it was already rotten from within. And so when we think about, when we devote ourselves to reading these sections of the Mishkan, even if we can't relate to the 4 cubits and the 5 cubits and the 20 hooks and this and that, let's just think about the bigger picture here. This was the Jewish people, a huge number of Jewish people of very diverse skills, personalities, and everything else, and they came together in common cause and built something beautiful, which in and of itself made it holy. So it's like how you would feel like if, I don't know, your children or your community or your class, if you're a teacher, if your class worked on a project together and all the kids helped, including the kids that were the gifted and talented and the ones who were barely hanging on, and they all did it together, that teacher would be in tears of joy. If you did this together, I'm gonna cry. That's all that God really wants from us. So the building of the Mishkan is that, and the women had the wisdom to see it and to stay focused on it. So God willing, we will as well, and that we can take this parsha and say at the end, chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek, strength, strength. Let us be strengthened. Let us be strengthened to take these 5 parshas, the most number of column inches devoted to any single thing in the entire Torah is the building of this Mishkan. That what it represented of what we did, this is not what God did. This is the parsha that's also really interesting. The beginning, we have God created heaven and earth. One chapter of Genesis, that's all that gets. That's it. Even the Exodus, okay, 2 parshas, 1.5, that's God's work. But our work gets 5 parshas. Because when it comes down to it, God can give us all the raw materials, all the everything. And if we can't figure out what we're supposed to do with it, and all we do is cause harm and problems for one another, it's like the parent is like, I'm sorry I left you anything. I'm sorry I gave you anything. And I want you to come together. And that's when you say you will build me. So God says, you build the Mishkan and I will dwell among you. I can only be in a place where there is peace. So that is what the Jewish people accomplished. And it was a shining, shining moment. Shining, shining moment. And it tells us what's possible. Because people are like, it's not possible. It's not possible. It's like, yes, it is. It is possible. Because each of us are descendants of those very exact same people. And so we inherited all their shtick. So there's nobody who has more shtick than those people. Then the people have not changed. So if they could do it, we could do it. So that I hope will be words of inspiration for us as we go forward. And chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. We should be strong, strong, and be strengthened. And I know it takes a lot of strength to go through everything we're going through, but keep moving forward, move forward to Pesach, get our lives in order, do what we're supposed to do. And Hashem should really bless each and every one of our efforts. Thank you so much. If anybody has any questions, or yes, Renee.
Thank you.
Okay, this is kind of wild, but here's my question. So, you know the halachas about shatnez, about not mixing wool and linen.
Yes.
So maybe I'm going off on a limb here, but I was just thinking as you were speaking that maybe the reason why we can't mix wool and linen in this day is because we don't have the temple anymore. And it's like the same reason why you can't play music on Shabbat. It's like things to remind us that we have to get back to a state where we, you know, where we can play music on Shabbat, where we could, you know, we can mix wool and linen again, because you know when.
Oh yeah, no, actually, I'm sorry, Renee. You can't mix wool and linen even if the temple stands.
Oh really?
That's a biblical prohibition. Yeah, that's.
Oh, because they brought wool and linen.
Yes, but they weren't woven together. Or actually, there might have been an exception for the clothing of the Kohen Gadol, of the Kohanim in the temple, just like, so this maybe was more of your comparison, is that there were sacrifices offered in the temple on Shabbos. Now, we know you can't cook on Shabbos. So the temple stands as a unique place. But once you step foot outside of the temple, no. So that was a unique place. But the forbidden nature of the mixing of wool and linen, that stands for all time. That stands for all time.
But did they mix it in the temple?
I have to look and see. It may have been only in the temple, in the Kohen's clothing, may have been. I have to look at that more carefully. But it was, if you were Renee Lazar living, you know, outside of and you're not a Kohen, no. So only in a certain place. Again, because the temple itself was it functioned in a kind of a different dimension. And so some of the laws were suspended there because of other things that were happening there. Does that make any sense? I mean, we tend to think of it just like as a place, but it was a different dimension, dimension of time. But the laws of shatnez are on all of us for, even if Mashiach comes tomorrow, no shatnez, no mixing.
But if a
Kohen,
you might be able to.
And I don't know enough to know. So don't quote me on this. So I have to look and see on his clothing of what it was. Maybe, but you can wear them. You can wear different items. That's like, I could wear a cotton skirt and a linen shirt. I just can't weave cotton and linen together. I can't have them be together, the threads together.
Wait, cotton and linen too? I thought it was just wool.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean cotton, wool and linen. I could have a wool skirt and a linen shirt, but I can't weave wool and linen threads together. So that's why they have shatnez checkers. People, it's very common to have wool and linen.
I know, yeah.
Woven together in the underside of men's suits on the backside. So we have friends who are shatnez checkers, and that has to be cut out and replaced. So that stands for all time.
Okay, thank you for letting me think about my random thought.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Etta, did you have a question?
As someone once explained to me that the Kohen Gadol's gown was exactly what Renee said, which was linen and wool together. And it was a way to atone for Cain and Abel, who one brought a sacrifice of flax and the other one brought an animal, a sheep. So it's a tremendous spiritual atonement that
That's so interesting.
that I heard about. I thought it was interesting.
Very
I love
interesting.
that, Etna. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a beautiful explanation.
So
Really
what's
beautiful.
interesting is, as beautiful as that is, then you would think that that should be something we should do. Ellyn Hutt, am also going to atone. It's like, no, you're not. You're not the Kohen Gadol. So that's the other thing, is that that's why I said I would have to look and see that when the Torah commands something. I'll give you another example. The cherubs, the kruvim, are in direct violation of the commandment of not making an image. That is an absolute prohibition, except that God commands that you do it for the Beit HaMikdash.
I've always wondered about that.
But don't try this at home. It's like the Beit HaMikdash things operate at a different level there. And so so the other thing that is beautifully said in this parsha, especially in Pekudei, is it keeps saying, and so they did according to the commandment of Moses. And so they did according to the commandments. And so they did. It's like, okay, just say at the end, they did everything according to instruction. It says they were making that point because it was in total opposition to the building of the golden calf, which was exactly not what God wanted. But when God said, do make the cherubs, do make whatever the wool and linen here, do this, it's like, it's only okay if God says it's okay. And it's not like we cannot extrapolate. We can't say, well, it was okay in the temple and my house is very holy and I'm so holy, so I'm going to do it. It's like breaks down. So the fact that it says that they did it exactly as they were commanded, that in and of itself is an atonement for the sin of the golden calf. It's like, I follow the directions. Now I have to say, as a person who cooks, and I can't quite except if I'm baking, I can't quite bring myself to exactly follow the recipe. You know, I have a recipe where I've changed almost every single thing. I still open the recipe to look at what I'm not doing, but I've made all these substitutions. But I'm not saying I'm the Kohen Gadol. I'm making chicken, so I can do what I want. But to be able, the human desire to I want to do what I want, versus I'm doing exactly what God commanded me to do, that it's in and of itself was considered a tremendous spiritual level for the Jewish people to reach. So yeah, was so much to be learned from these parshas. Any other thoughts or questions or anything else? Okay, ladies, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it, and have a wonderful Shabbos Chazak. It's also Shabbat Mevorchim. We'll be announcing the new month of Nisan to get ready for Pesach.
Thank you.
So
Thank
don't
you.
panic. Okay. It's great to see you.
Everybody stay well.
You too. Take care, Dorothy.
Thank you.
Bye, Kathy. Bye, Renee. Bye, Leslie. Bye, Mindy. Bye, Lisa. Bye, Andy.